Hi, Katie, and the listeners.
Hi, Becca and listeners.
So, this is our first podcast episode. And if you can see us on the YouTube channel, you can probably see we both look really excited, but also uncomfortably nervous because we don't know what to do with ourselves.
Yeah, this is going to take some getting used to, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, I'm not used to talking into a fancy mic like this.
Same.
It is also exciting because doing a podcast is something I've wanted to do or thought about doing maybe for quite a while. I don't know about you, Katie.
Yeah, I've always liked the idea of it, but I guess it's finding the right person to do it with, Becca.
Isn't she a smooth talker? Yeah, I mean, I've been suggested from friends and family before, you should do a podcast. But I don't know. I always felt a bit uncomfortable about the idea because I thought I needed to, I don't really know, to have achieved something before I do a podcast. Like maybe I need to be fully qualified as a therapist before I can do a
Mm.
podcast, or I don't know, just have something behind me that makes me feel like I'm more qualified to do a podcast. I see you nodding, Katie, so that makes me feel like you can relate. And then recently we met and started to discuss the idea of doing a podcast together. I thought, screw that. Anyone can do a podcast. Why not? It's just my perfectionism getting in the way when really we can just do the podcast and we can learn as we go.
I think you get stuck in this trap, don't we, of waiting for things, waiting for us to be better at things or to have more knowledge or to have more information before we feel we can put ourselves out there.
Mhm.
So we're just putting ourselves out there. And I'm reminding myself that it's not about having all the answers by any means. It's about offering connection with people and relatability. And I hope that's what people take away from this at the end of the day, hearing us talk about things that they relate to. And if we can help people feel less alone, then I think we've done what we've intended on doing.
Yes, absolutely. I could not have put that better myself, Katie. This is why I chose to do a podcast with you. You do all the talking.
Oh no.
So I suppose we should start by introducing ourselves because some people might not know who we are. I'll take one for the team and go first. So my name's Becca. I have an Instagram account called Binge Free and Beautiful. So I imagine some people will have found this podcast through my Instagram. And on my Instagram, I talk about overcoming binge eating, basically, and body image healing. And I use a lot of my own personal experience on there to help people feel less alone, share guidance of what helped me, what might be really going on behind the binges and those bad body image days. But yeah, the point of my Instagram account is to offer people this little place on the internet where they can feel less alone in what they're experiencing. And I'd like to think I can play some small role in helping people achieve binge free life and to help them feel accepted, maybe even beautiful in their bodies. So that's what the name is all about. And I worked for 4 years at BEAT, the eating disorder charity within the UK. And there I supported people on the helplines. And I also supported people through guided self-help programs for binge eating disorder and bulimia. And we supported parents who were also helping their teenage children with eating disorders as well. So quite a lot of different experience there supporting people with eating disorders. And, as I've alluded to, I have my own lived experience, which we're going to get into today in sharing a bit of our story. And that's what really fueled all of this. It fuels the podcast, the Instagram, the work that I did do at B. And it also fuels what I'm doing now in training to become a psychotherapist. So I'm doing a master's to be an integrative psychotherapist. So hopefully one day I can work therapeutically with people to help them overcome binge eating as well. So that's me in a nutshell. What about you, Katie? Tell me and the listeners about you.
So I'm Katie. I am a binge eating recovery and body image coach. And I qualified as I was coming out of recovery myself. And Instagram became a place for me to talk about my experience with disordered eating and what recovery was like for me. And it was really the first place I connected with other people about my experience, because a lot of my struggles I kept to myself. And I think a lot of people do. And so Instagram was my first outlet of actually talking about my experience and trying to reach people who are also struggling. So my work now is really, I love being that space for people where they feel like they are talking to someone who totally gets it, who has been through it, who knows what it feels like. Even the things that we feel too ashamed to talk about, to have someone else say, no, I get that. I've been through that. I've experienced that. I think that's so imperative in this journey, and I love it.
It's really interesting hearing what you said there around creating an Instagram account and qualifying as you were coming out of recovery, or, at the end phases of recovery, because that felt really relatable to me, because that's when I started my Instagram account too. And
Really?
yeah, it was around lockdown. Well, actually, it was in lockdown. I started my Instagram account, and that was fueled by what was going on with lockdown and feeling like there would be so many people during that period of time that would be really struggling with binge eating, because there was so much uncertainty in the world, so much anxiety around what was happening. Routines completely changed. We weren't able to obviously go out. So that would have been triggering for me when I was in that peak of my eating disorder, to have to stay in the house with certain foods surrounding me all the time, and changes to gyms closing, all of that. And I just really, really felt at the time, I'm in a place where I'm able to talk about this. I cannot sit at home and think about other people going through this difficulty and not do anything about it. So there was the drive of lockdown helping me create that Instagram. But I was also at that point myself where I was like, I feel like I'm coming to the end of recovery, or feeling in a place where I actually truly feel recovered for the first time. So I want to share that with people in case that helps.
Do you know what? It's really interesting because you talk about the lockdown, and I can remember that first lockdown. It made my eating disorder worse. And it was the second lockdown that spurred on my recovery, because I was like, I can't do this again. Because I thought the first lockdown, because I moved in with my partner and it was quite early in our relationship, so there was quite a vulnerability to doing that. And I thought, well, this is great because I can't binge because I'm living with this guy. Like, this is what I need to kind of snap me out of this. And of course, it didn't play out like that. My binging was the worst it had ever been. It's just interesting, that experience that we all had and how it affected us in different ways. Because I think that was the thing, that lockdown, you had nothing, you had no distractions, nothing to escape from. And so that's just really interesting, listening to you talk about it and thinking about my experience with it.
Yeah. And not to sound like a broken record here, but what you said was just really interesting as well. Because you said that you moved in with your partner quite early on in your relationship in that first lockdown. And me and my partner became a couple literally a month before we went into lockdown. So that was a big test for a new relationship.
Yeah.
We did already live together as friends, then we became a couple, and then went into lockdown.
Talk about throwing you in at the deep end.
Like, I know. I mean, we survived.
Go for it.
But I can see how, that period was really difficult for people. And on the flip side, for some people, it helped. Like for me, it did actually help me, because the point I was at in recovery, it almost, like, at the time I was working in an industry that was quite focused on how I looked. And it felt like that was this final piece that I needed to let go. But I couldn't, because of the work that I was in. And then that got taken away from me because of lockdown. And I appreciate that could have been something that really set me back in recovery, but actually it made me feel like I had the space and the freedom to relax and say, I don't have to worry about my body as much, because that is not even pressure for me anymore. And I felt like I had this, like, sort of safe little bubble for myself. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making sense with that.
It does make sense. It's just fascinating to hear you talk about it, and my experience being the complete opposite, in that the gym was taken away from me and I was very obsessively exercising at this point, just probably days before the lockdown. And waking up, and he turned around to me and he said, "The gyms have closed." And I freaked out. I couldn't even gather myself. And so it spurred on this obsessive need to match the exercise I was doing in the gym to try and recreate that at home. Like trying to buy fitness equipment. I was running because I didn't have a stepper. Very quickly became this cycle of binge restrict. And because I had started lockdown looking a certain way, I felt this pressure to come out looking the same way. I tried to say to myself, it's okay. Like, you've probably got a good month now. You're fine. If you can just stop this tomorrow, you'll be fine. And I could feel it slipping away from me because I just couldn't keep on top of it. And I had no means of escaping it. And so that first lockdown was the worst my binge eating had ever been, which subsequently resulted in my recovery towards the end of that year anyway.
It just goes to show, doesn't it, that two people can experience the same scenario externally. We were both going through lockdown in the UK. Obviously, there will be differences, but very similar. But we responded differently to it. It was how our mind perceived it, because the pressure you spoke about there, feeling like you had to go into lockdown in a certain body and come out with the same body. I can relate to that pressure in other times of my life, but during lockdown, I felt differently. My brain perceived the whole situation differently. I felt like there were so many people who couldn't access gyms. There were so many people who were having changes to their routine, changes to the diet, that so many people's bodies were going to change over that period of time that it made me feel like it normalized it for me. And for the first time, I think ever, I felt able to let go of that final piece that I felt was this like niggling piece, because I'd done so much work on recovery in many areas over the years, and final kind of piece of body image I couldn't let go of. And because it became normal for people's bodies to change, it almost felt like it gave me permission to let go of that final thing. So it's really, really fascinating to hear the similarities and the differences at the same time.
Yeah, and as you say, the same, if not very similar scenario, but the way in which we respond to that. Because I think with lockdown, that when I look back on that time, I was very much in denial of my binge eating, which I had always been in denial of. I had struggled with anorexia in my early teens and felt like ever since then, it had been my mission to get back to that. Like, how do you go from being someone who can control their food and manipulate their body to such a degree to then being someone who can't even be trusted around food? I was in denial of the fact that what I had was an eating disorder and that it wasn't just simply my inability to have some control and have some discipline. So I don't know what your experience was like for you growing up with food and your body.
Well, that was a brilliant segue, Katie, because we did say in this first episode we would share our stories about how we developed eating disorders. And we just went off on a COVID tangent there. So that might happen quite a bit. So yeah, I suppose my upbringing with food and body image, when I was thinking about what I wanted to share around this, I think it's really important to mention, before any disordered eating or eating disorders developed, that there was this really big piece in the background for me around body image. And I think sometimes when I've spoken about my experiences on other podcasts or online, I've jumped in straight away talking about the development of the eating disorder, like when that happened. And that doesn't actually give voice to all of the background of the body image issues and messaging that I grew up with, and potentially why that then developed into an eating disorder. So there was a few key moments in my upbringing that I feel quite significant. And one of the first ones was actually when I was being fitted for a bridesmaid's dress, and I was 11 at the time. And I remember when my measurements were being taken, that my stomach was measured and my chest was measured. I remember somebody saying to me at the time, an influential person in my family saying that it was good that my stomach was flatter than my chest. And I just needed to make sure that it would always stay that way. And this comment stuck with me for such a long time. And the reason I think this was really important, because I think it was the first time I ever got the message, you need to be conscious of your body. Your body is going to change. This is what I took from it. Like, your body is going to change as you get older, and you need to be conscious of that, and you need to control it. That's the messaging I took away from that experience. And then I remember when I was about 13, going to swimming party at school and getting a lot of attention from this group of boys on this swimming party about my body. And this would be quote unquote positive attention and comments, but it wasn't really positive, because what I took away from that was that, if you want to be noticed by the opposite sex, you have to look a certain way. Like, your body is important. That was my takeaway. Like, how you look is important as to whether you're attractive or not. And that experience feels really significant to me, but it also feeds into a lot of other messaging I heard growing up around women's worth is based on their look. And then I feel like the third event in my teen years, which was really significant for creating this kind of body image piece that was such a huge part of my eating disorder, was when I became 16 and I joined a gym with my friend. And we had a health induction, as you did at that time. Like, everywhere you went, you joined a gym, you had to have health induction. They weighed you, they gave you your BMI, your body fat, all of that jazz, which now I know is not all it's cracked up to be, really, is it? But I remember the instructor saying to me at age 16 that I really needed to lose weight, and my body fat was really, really bad. He said it was the body fat percentage you would expect to see from a 60-year-old woman. And if I carried on as I was going to have serious health problems or die in my 30s. And I'm here in my 30s. I'm fine.
Oh my God.
Really, really harmful. Like, I look back now and think that was so irresponsible to say as a gym instructor. But at the time, I was 16 and all of these body image issues were starting to build already. So I really took that very seriously. And I remember my friend who I was with, she didn't take it in the way that I did. She sort of laughed it off and said, "Oh, he's just trying to get you to be a client. Just ignore him." And I couldn't see that perspective. And we went home and ordered a takeaway. And I didn't eat anything that night with her. And that was the first time that I remember actively restricting or feeling like I need to do something to change my body. Because up until that point, I may have got this messaging around what my body should look like or shouldn't look like, but I actually hadn't done anything to manipulate it. And that night felt like a really significant point for me, because it was the first time I did actively restrict.
Wow. The impact of people's words that they say in passing, and yet you carry them with you and you can recollect word for word what they have said and the impact it's had on you since then.
Yeah. I think the difference in how I interpreted that and how my friend interpreted it also kind of speaks back to the piece we were talking around COVID, where how you interpreted the lockdown and I interpreted the lockdown was different. I'm sure some of the people who said certain things to me in my upbringing didn't even think of them as like a significant moment, but my little brain attached onto them. I don't know about you, Katie, but I grew up in that time of like heroin chic time where like Kate Moss was everywhere. And
oh yeah, what was it? Like nothing tastes as good as skinny feels or skinny looks.
that was my screensaver on my phone for a while. That was the era I grew up in. It was when we had X Factor, and gosh, how many women got absolutely slammed for how they looked on X Factor. It was the time when magazines and the media were absolutely brutal with women's bodies. All of these things still exist, for sure. But I feel like that period of time was a real peak. Comparisons everywhere in
Hmm.
magazines and even in
Yes.
teenage magazines. It was very irresponsible. So I think what's really important to say around this whole body image piece, in my upbringing anyway, actually at the time, I did not realize that it was not healthy for me to have that perspective around my body.
Hmm.
I didn't view it as a poor body image or body image issues. I just viewed it as normal because it was everywhere. So I just thought this is what happens. Like as you get older, this is how you start to think about your body. Like friends were on the special K diet with their mums, and it was just a normal thing that I guess I didn't question
Yeah, because you don't know any better, do you?
it. Mhm.
I mean, I remember the body image was definitely there first before any kind of disordered eating. And I have such a vivid memory of being in primary school. So I would have been like 9, 10. You know? I remember being in the pinafore dresses that you had to wear, the uniform, and looking down at my legs and being very aware that they were huge. That's how I perceived them to be. And feeling really horrified about that and looking around to my sister and to my friends and thinking, I have the biggest legs between us. And I was 9. And that's the first memory I have of suddenly being aware of my body and having feelings about it. But it fueled this. I'm going to say the word hate, and I don't mean that lightly. I really, really hated being in my body. I felt like everyone else's bodies were fine, but mine was a problem. And it was my mission to correct it. Somehow, I always felt bigger than everyone else. I felt like I was that odd one out. And it showed up in what I now know to be social anxiety, of being so hyper focused on how other people were perceiving me and what they were thinking of me, and just anything from the way I walked to the way I stood to the way my hair looked. Like I felt such vigilance just existing, incredibly self-conscious of my body. And I will say that I think I must have been about 15, my health wasn't great, and it just felt like this added attention piece that I did not want. I don't want people to see me. I don't want people to pay attention to me. And yet my body's going against me here, and I'm experiencing something that I have absolutely no control over. And it just felt like another thing on my list, another reason to dislike my body and be against it. And so there was still this underlying hate for my body, like cannot be in my skin at times, that caused me visceral distress being in my body, just existing in it. That was always there. It seemed to transpire into restriction when I was in the middle of my teens. And I think it was coming off the back of my health not being great and, trying to control something when I had very little control over my actual body. So I think that my restriction was really a way of me of trying to translate some pain that I felt just being. And that sounds probably
Mhm.
quite heavy for some people, but I've always felt like someone who's like, I'm a lot. I'm a bit much, you know? And I think that also came across in this need to shrink myself to soothe that feeling of I am a lot.
Mm.
I'm intense. Even though I was quite shy, and I have a twin sister, so I hid behind her, and I was fine with that. I don't need to be center stage. Looking back on it and seeing how it played out, but obviously didn't realize what was going on at the time, but how I was fighting this need to shrink myself and feeling like I was too much and trying to fix that through changing my body.
Yeah. It feels like from what you've said there that there are similarities between the two of us, because there's those body image issues building away in the background, and
Mhm.
then around 16, quite a traumatic event. It feels like there's a piece around control in what you've described there
Mhm.
too. And what I haven't gone in yet to in my development of the eating disorder was that around 16, my parents also went through a divorce, and it was a really chaotic, confusing time. Looking back, I was probably more involved in it than I feel like I should have been. And And then around age 18, I went on a date and was date raped by someone. And that period of those couple of years between 16 to 18, when those two traumatic events happened, was when I then developed a full-blown eating disorder. That body image issues then turned into something more serious around those few years. But what is interesting is I have referred to it as a control piece right now. And I can look back and I can see that. And I can see how my parents separating and going through sexual trauma like that felt out of control. And I see the perspective of trying to control my body as a way of trying to feel together. But people told me this at the time, and I really didn't feel comfortable with that. When people said to me, oh, it's because everything's out of control that you're trying to control your body. I used to be angry actually at people saying that to me because it didn't feel like that at the time. They were trying to be helpful and trying to help me make a connection between the two, but it just didn't feel right at the time. Rather than it feeling like control for me at the time, it felt like, this is going to sound like a contradiction. It felt like it was the only way I could express my emotions. Like I didn't know how to put my emotions out verbally. So I was able to do that through food. And here is the contradiction. At the same time, the binging and the purging felt like the only way I actually got a release from my emotions as well, because it felt like when I went into that trance of a binge and then a purge, it was the only time I actually wasn't really thinking about the pain I was experiencing. And I didn't feel overwhelmed by emotions because it served the purpose of like escaping my own mind for a while, escaping the emotions, numbing. I think that can be really, really confusing for people to experience an eating disorder or to support someone with an eating disorder, that it can be the way of someone expressing their emotions and also the way of them trying to numb and escape from the emotions.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't make sense, does it? How can it do the complete opposite at the same time? But I'm seeing you nodding and it feels like you get it.
Yeah, it's true, because this speaks to the way in which food has numerous purposes for us and shows up in so many different ways. I really relate to when you spoke about restriction. And for me, it's the same in that was how I was trying to communicate that it didn't feel safe to feel seen. I needed to be small. I needed to shrink. And I couldn't articulate that for myself. I couldn't even comprehend it. Whether that's hindsight, I'm not sure, but I could feel that that was what was going on. And it's such a heavy thing to feel, as are a lot of these things. And so there's something about using food or the restriction of food that feels like you're doing something about it, even though it's not helping or fixing the issue. It gives you the temporary relief of feeling like you are doing something about it. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying. Absolutely. I relate to what you say about it being kind of the only way you could communicate that you didn't feel safe about something. I can definitely relate to that. I felt really out of control, like completely out of control when I was binging and purging. I felt like I had no choice in that. I remember at the time, like writing a poem, because I did a lot of poetry at that time as well, and describing it as if it felt like a demon entered into my mind and took control over what I was doing. I think that also at the level of contradiction in that people are telling you what you're doing is trying to control your body because everything else feels out of control. Or like you say, managing your food gives you the illusion of things being in control. And then at the same time, you're feeling like you actually don't have anything what is happening in your behavior or your thoughts or the way you are with food. So again, that's another really confusing place to be, where you feel in control and the opposite at the same time.
You know, when you speak of it like that, the first thing I think of, like, no wonder I thought I was going crazy. No wonder I literally thought I was going insane. Something was wrong with me. I briefly spoke of this earlier, especially when I went from someone who was severely restricting. I actually went into an inpatient treatment center for not very long to address the restriction, but also at that point, the hatred and the difficulty to be in my body had shown up in ways like self-harming. That was something that I really, really had no control over. And coming out of that treatment was when the binging really felt like it came out of nowhere for me. And I look at it now, like spending the next, 10 plus years thinking, why can't I go back to restricting? I've done it once. I could do it. I was doing it. I was successfully doing it. And yet now I have gone the complete opposite. And so it felt like another reason to dislike myself. It felt like an incompetence on my part. Like, how do you go from someone who can exude so much control around food to someone who is evidently out of control around it? And it became my life of trying to tame my appetite that I very strongly believed was a problem that I needed to fix. And always feeling so confused about it, so confused about the appetite and the need for food. Like, even when you're eating, even when I was full to the point of feeling like I can remember having to like sleep upright because lying down was too painful, and yet still wanting to go and keep eating. Throughout all of this, all of the experience of the disordered eating and the body image, just this complete disconnect from my body and who I was, and shame for just being me. And it's, I mean, I don't know where I'm going with this, Becca.
Did we get too heavy? Did we get too heavy for the first episode? I don't know.
I don't know. What do you think, Becca?
Well, I don't know. I think, how do you talk about the experience of an eating disorder without it getting heavy? Because these are very deeply personal experiences, and they are really hard things to go through. I think to be able to talk about it from your real lived experience is really important for people to feel like they can connect and relate, and they're really not alone, because there's a difference, isn't there, between picking up a book about eating disorder recovery and hearing a list of symptoms that define an eating disorder and reading that and going, I do X, Y, Z, so I have an eating disorder. That is different to somebody going, this is how I felt in my body, and this is how the experience felt for me emotionally and physically. And for me, if I had been able to hear that from someone at the time, that would have made me feel less alone. And I think that's important. And I didn't have that at the time. I went through a lot of these experiences, keeping a lot of this to myself and not feeling like anyone actually was ever experiencing that level of pain that I was. So, yeah, we might have got a bit heavy, but hopefully to our listeners, that can be translated as you're not alone. If you are experiencing some of this, then we really get it.
Yeah, I think firstly, if you want a podcast that sugarcoats, we are not the podcast for you. I think that's the point that we want to relay straight from the get-go. And I think secondly, you hit the nail on the head with helping people feel less alone, because I remember having certain types of therapy in my late teens, early 20s, and the way that they would talk about how I felt about my body, if that ever really came up, because let's be honest, it was for me, it was very focused on food, was messaged to me in this, your body does so much for you. Like, you should be grateful for your body. You get up in the morning and you have legs that carry you and this kind of stuff. And I could not connect with that, because there is such a cutoff between me and my body that I don't even want to be in it. I don't care that that's what it does for me. That just never landed with me. And that in and of itself made me feel even more so like something is wrong with me, because I cannot access this. I can't even humor myself with this. And I even see it now with clients. And when they talk to me about the way they feel about their bodies, and I know what it feels like to not want to be in your own skin. And when they have the courage to speak that to me, and then I come back and say, yeah, I know how that feels. You can't match that with someone, can you? That relief. Okay, I'm not crazy here. This isn't something that's wrong with me. This is how I feel. There's a reason for this, but there's no reason why I can't make steps to repair it in some way. I mean, fundamentally, you're either going to relate to it or you're not. But the whole point of this podcast is that we are transparent and we talk about our experiences for those who need their similar experiences talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we did say we were going to give a brief description of why we've called the podcast what we've called it, and just to set that tone. I mean, we've probably given you a tone of what the podcast is going to be like already, but Katie, why did we call the podcast what we've called it?
Well, I will say actually that, Becca, you made the connection really from it. The Once Upon a Binge, it alludes to like this fairy tale vibe, this illusion that I very much bought into, that if I could fix my body, if I could present a certain way, if I could look a certain way, then I was promised this life that was happy and easy and perfect, essentially. I think there's a lot more here, and that I don't think we can deny the fact that we very much are in a world where it's safer to exist in a smaller body. I don't think we can deny that. But the Once Upon a Binge is very much a play on this fairy tale idea of the way in which we should live, the way we should look, and how we should be. Would you say that's right, Becca? Would you agree with that?
I fully agree with that. That's how I felt when I saw it in the list. I was like, that's the one. That is the name that we need to use, because we will go into this in more episodes, I'm sure, because today we were just trying to share a bit about the development of our eating disorders and what that looked like and felt like at the time. But there was such a huge piece for me throughout my whole experience of having an eating disorder, which was around trying to have that perfect body and have that perfect diet. By the way, these are in quotation marks. Have that perfect body, have the perfect diet, just to be that perfect person that everyone's like, oh, how did she do that? Oh, yeah, gosh, she's so good, you know? And
yes, and makes it look effortless as well, by the way. There's something about doing it like, I just get up at 5 and run 10 miles and it's just easy. You know, that illusion of making it look simple as well, I think, which just gets you more, doesn't it? Because it's like, but why is this so hard and I'm not even there yet?
Yeah, it's all an illusion, and that's what fairy tales are. And fairy tales, I think, really, really push that message of women are valued on their body, and there is a perfect way for a woman to look, and the gender stereotype as well as being like weak and needing someone to help them. And we are not about that. We're going to get rid of that on this podcast.
Don't get me started, Becca. We don't have time for that today. But yeah,
we don't.
You are, yeah, man, we carry a lot, don't we?
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's been interesting for people to hear a bit about our stories. I appreciate we haven't really gone into a huge amount of like what helped us in recovery, what does recovery look like, and there's still so much more to our stories. There's still so much more to my story, and I'm sure there is for you, Katie. But we'll go into that much more in other episodes. But this is us. This is where we're starting from.
Yeah.
We hope to hear you in episode 2.
Catch you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.